Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher, and this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And as you can tell from our set, it's Christmas time. So during this time, we really just want to thank our supporters so much for watching the show.
And it's people like you who make resources like this show possible. So just thank you so much. It really means a lot to us.
And if you want to support resources like this show, visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, make sure you are subscribing to our channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button below. We want you to stay up to date on all the new videos that we're putting out.
And we also want you to get connected with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find us at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you want just the audio version, you can get the podcast of 2819. That's on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
Well, now it's time for our rundown. In our Nexus segment, we're going to hear from Fazale Rana. He's going to be on Jude 3 Project, and he'll talk about the question, how can Christians reasonably disagree about the age of the earth?
Awesome. And in R2B 101, Krista will be talking with Ken Samples, asking the question, what do Christians believe about Mary?
Really important question, especially during this time of year.
Yes.
In our Give and Take segment, Jeff will talk with Dr. Fazale Rana about the question, why does the genetic code look so designed?
And in Culture Talk, Sandra will be talking to Krista Bontrager, asking the question, who were the wise men? Let's check that out.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Krista Bontrager. You're all the things, right?
Yeah,
you're a theologian, first of all.
Yeah.
But you're also the Scholar Community Program Director.
Yes.
So, yeah, lots of things that you're doing. And one of the things that you do well here is kind of explain the theology behind some of our favorite stories, right?
I love the Bible.
Yes.
I've spent my whole adult life teaching the Bible, and I love bringing it to life for people, especially at Christmas time.
Yep. Yeah, and when we think of Christmas, we think of, all of the popular figures that we see on our wrapping paper and all that stuff, and we hear in the songs. 3 of those figures, or some of those figures, because we'll talk about numbers later, but the wise men.
Yes. The wise men are an interesting character, if you will. In Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 2 talks about these men from the East who come to worship Jesus. And I think that what's so fascinating to me about them is that there's this classification called wise men. It actually doesn't say wise men in the Greek. It's this word magos, which is where we get the word magi. We just kind of turn the G into a J, but it's magos. And it's this very ancient word and kind of has Persian origins for this class of intellectuals who were known in the ancient world as consultants to the king. And sometimes they kind of are consultants in what we would call an occultic sense of consulting the stars or consulting certain divination practices. But they're not necessarily that. They were also very, very educated. And we also see some mentions of this in the Egyptian courts in Genesis and in Exodus, that there was this group, this kind of class of people called wise men. And so these magi, I have a theory about that.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that. But first, what we know now, what you just explained, is that they're highly educated.
Yeah.
So that's good to kind of remember as you get deeper into this. So what is your theory?
Yeah, well, because the word is kind of a Persian origin, that's interesting to me, because in the book of Daniel, in the Old Testament, in Daniel chapter 2, it mentions how Daniel was put in charge of all of the king's wise men. And in the Greek Septuagint translation of the Old Testament, it's the same word. It's these magos. So that makes me wonder if maybe these mysterious figures from the East were descendants of those men that Daniel supervised, if you will. And maybe they had some insight as to when the Messiah might appear through Daniel as a very loyal and faithful Jew. Because it's interesting to me, the book of Daniel is really a critical book that kind of gives us some clues about when the Messiah will come. And so I find it fascinating that these men kind of know to start looking for signs of when to come to look for this Jewish Messiah. Now, why would potentially Persian men from the East be interested in looking for a Jewish Messiah if there wasn't some understanding they had in their heritage about that?
Right. So then we have these highly educated men who are also very attentive and looking for the Messiah. So why did they visit the Christ child?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the text just tells us that they came to worship him. Well, why would they come to worship him? There was either something about the signs that told them that Jesus was a king, or there was something, I think, in their intellectual heritage that told them to go look for a Jewish Messiah. But then they come and they bring these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These are not your average baby shower gifts.
Right.
You know? They didn't bring diapers or anything. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, very interesting gifts that they bring to him, and very costly. And it makes me wonder why those gifts. And they kind of hint at the future death of Jesus. These are some of the elements that are used in burial practices.
So what do you think God was trying to communicate in having these wise men visit the Christ child?
Yeah, that's a great question. Matthew's gospel is written to Jewish Christians. It's written to Jews who have believed in Jesus as their Messiah. So it has a lot of Jewish information in it. But it also has these interesting, I call them foreshadowings, that God is now going to include the Gentiles as part of his covenant community. And we know that full blown in the book of Acts. But Matthew, I think, is just giving us a preview of coming attractions of what's going to happen in salvation history. And now Gentiles are going to be included. And I love how this couples with Luke's gospel that we talked about last year of the shepherds, because there's such a message of that when Jesus comes, it's an invitation to everyone. In today's vernacular, we would call it an invitation of inclusion, that it includes everyone. It includes the rich, as in the Magi, and it includes the poor. It includes the social outcasts and people who are in the seats of power. It's an invitation to everyone. All are invited to come become part of the kingdom of God. Now, not all respond to that invitation. Not all decide to follow Jesus as their rabbi and become his disciple. But the invitation goes out to everyone.
I love that. I love that through the wise men and through the shepherds, we are hearing this story that Christ is here for the Gentiles and for the unclean. When we think of people today, Christ is here and available for all. That's such a beautiful message, especially around Christmas time. Thank you so much for sharing. If you want to hear more from Krista, visit reasons.org and search Krista Bontrager. Now we're going to head to a Nexus segment where Dr. Fazale Rana talks about how Christians can reasonably disagree about the age of the earth. Let's check it out.
We're seeing more articles on the date of the age of the earth, and trying to wrestle through kind of our beliefs of Scripture, and trying to be honest about science and trying to be honest about Scripture at the same time. And it's I think you provided some helpful thoughts for us to think through this whole thing, whether you adopt a younger earth position or older earth position. I think it's helpful to think through this critically and not just throw out, hear somebody with an older earth position and say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Science is not accurate. I think it's important for us to think critically through these things.
How you specifically understand Genesis 1 is really a challenging question. And again, there's a number of different approaches that people have taken who are sincere Bible-believing Christians who love Jesus. And when it comes to now, how do you relate the specifics of scientific discovery to the biblical accounts of origins is also a very difficult enterprise. And well-meaning, intelligent people who are doing their best work can come to very different conclusions. And so to me, the point would be we shouldn't divide over this issue as a church. We've got to learn how to discuss our disagreements in a way that promotes unity in the body, but yet allows people to hold differing perspectives and wrestle through differing perspectives. And this to me is really good because it means that if you are a Christian and you are exposed to ideas in science, you've got three places to land. You can land in a young earth camp. You can land in the old earth creationist camp. You can land in an evolutionary creationist camp. And every position has strengths and weaknesses. No position is perfect, but at least there's a landing point. And to me, that means that science should never be a reason why anybody walks away from their faith. Or science should never be a reason why somebody isn't willing to hear the truth claims of the gospel. And so to me, I hope that the church moves beyond fighting over these issues to allowing different perspectives to exist on the table of options that young people and old people have in terms of how to make sense of science faith issues. And we can have some invigorating discussions where we strongly disagree with one another, but let's do it in a way that we remember that we still are part of the church and we can figure out how to work together to accomplish God's purposes in the midst of those disagreements.
If you'd like to find out more about what our friends at the Jude 3 Project are doing, please visit their website at jude3project.com. And now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help train you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. Christmas is quickly approaching. It's that time of year we focus on the birth of Jesus. But I asked my friend Kenneth Samples to come help me talk about, in particular, this idea of the virgin birth,
yes,
which is a classic, historic Christian doctrine, but we especially focus on it at Christmas time. So let's first start with a definition of what is the virgin birth.
Yes, and so this is the backdrop of what we call the incarnation. So the second person of the Trinity takes a human nature and becomes man. That birth involves a miracle in the womb of the Virgin Mary. So a virgin birth, meaning that Mary is impregnated by a miracle rather than by normal pregnancy. And so Jesus is born into the world through the birth of Mary and becomes a real, genuine human being.
Now, the virgin birth, as we call it, is mentioned in one of the most ancient kind of summaries or creeds of the Christian faith, what it means to be a Christian, that
yes,
Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary. Why do Christians think that this is such a foundational doctrine?
Yeah, you're referencing, of course, the Apostles' Creed, not written by the apostles, but reflecting apostolic teaching. So why is it important? Because right at the heart of Christianity is this idea that Jesus has come into the world, that he's a real human being. So believing that Jesus is both God and man makes it possible for him then at the cross to redeem God and man. So this is his entrance into the world, not merely some kind of spirit or ghostly figure. Jesus is a single person and has both a divine and human nature. Now,
the figure of Mary can be sometimes a little bit of a divisive figure, even among
Sure.
Christians. You know, there's three major branches of Christianity. There's Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants. And you and I are Protestants, and
Right.
Reasons to Believe is a ministry, is a Protestant organization. But all three of those groups are broadly considered to be Christian.
Yeah, part of Christendom.
Yeah, but all of us revere Mary, but sometimes Protestants are a little leery of kind of
Yeah.
the overemphasis, what they see as the overemphasis of Mary by our Catholic friends. But they also have concerns about us kind of underemphasizing Mary.
That's right. Yeah, the Protestant reaction, there are certain titles that are given to Mary that seem to parallel Christological titles that make Protestants at times concerned. But I think it is fair to say that Protestants maybe haven't given as much reflection as necessary as to Mary, a person who is a person of faith, the mother of Jesus Christ, a person who has role models. And so I see Mary as a figure that we should honor and respect, the way we would honor Peter or James or John. She's not an apostolic author. She's human. She makes mistakes, but she is a pattern for faith. And I think at Christmas time, it's a great time to give consideration to her role in this miraculous incarnation.
I think that's a great reflection, because when I think about Mary, I have to tell you honestly, as a Protestant, I haven't reflected a lot on Mary and her example of faith and what that might mean for me as a mom, as a disciple. I need to reflect more deeply about Mary's position as the mother of Jesus, but also as a disciple of Jesus.
That's exactly right.
I think that it's very important that we keep Mary in proper perspective. I think that's kind of the Protestant concern, is not to worship her. Help us understand this idea of worshiping Mary. Do Catholics worship Mary?
Well, Catholics make a distinction between worship, latria, dulia, and hyperdulia. So dulia, honor, is given to the saints. Hyperdulia is given to Mary. Latria, worship, is given to God. So technically, Roman Catholics do not worship the Virgin Mary the way they would worship the members of the Trinity. Nevertheless, there are concerns on the part of Protestants that prayers are offered to her. She is related and given titles that seem more Christological than they are human-oriented. So, but the answer to your question is, technically, they do not worship Mary. Now, there may be millions of people who, in an uneducated way and inconsistent with Catholic theology, nevertheless step across the line and worship Mary. And I think that would be idolatry.
Oh, that's a very helpful way of thinking about it. Well, in light of the miracle of conception of Jesus, how can we think about this at Christmas time when we're talking to our non-Christian friends?
Yeah, I think, we in my tradition, we call it Advent, the coming of the Lord. This is, I think, such an important aspect. I remember when the astronauts landed on the moon in 1969, and I thought to myself, it's a great thing for a man to walk on the moon, but the incarnation, Christmas means God has walked on the earth. This is the visited planet. This was God's plan. He chose Mary, used her as a vehicle, and she submitted to him to bring about the incarnation of the Son of God. And so Jesus is God and man, and this incarnation then influences all other aspects of Christianity. His death, his resurrection is all possible because he is one person with a divine and human natures.
Very good. Thank you. And I want to encourage you, if you'd like to read more from Ken, just go to our website, reasons.org, and search for Reflections. Now let's go over to Jeff, who's talking to Fuzz about the question, why does the genetic code look so designed?
Hello, Jeff Zwernick again here with Give and Take. This is the segment of the show where we look at fascinating scientific discoveries that help equip you to share the gospel with those around. Today I'm joined by my colleague and friend Fazale Rana, and we're going to be looking and asking the question, is the genetic code well designed? Fuzz, good to have you here today.
Jeff?
Now I got to say, this is one of those topics that almost seems out of place. I mean, we're talking biology, and that doesn't seem to be computer science genetic code. So why do scientists use the term genetic code? What's going on here?
Yeah, and to understand that, we've got to do a very quick primer in molecular biology. But the way to think about this is that biochemical systems are not only molecules, but they actually are molecules that harbor information.
Okay.
And so DNA is an information storage molecule. And the way that it stores information is digitally.
Which means what?
In discrete units.
Okay.
Just like there's digital information that's stored in a computer system.
So kind of like ones and zeros, if you will.
Exactly.
Okay.
Except here we're dealing with A, G, C's, and T's instead of ones and zeros.
All right.
But the idea is that DNA is a long molecule that's linear, and it's formed from smaller molecules that are linked together in a chain. And those smaller molecules are abbreviated A, G, C, and T. Sometimes are called the genetic letters. And so just like the sequence of letters in the English alphabet can specify words, the sequence of genetic letters can specify biochemical words, which would be the instructions needed to make another class of molecules called proteins.
Okay.
And
So let me just, before we move on there, is this just something that's a helpful mnemonic, or is it actually a code?
it's actually a code.
Okay.
But again, you've got information in the form of the sequences of genetic letters that make up the DNA molecule. Well, that information is really the set of instructions to make proteins.
Okay.
And proteins are molecules that carry out the different cell operations, that form the different cell structures. There's thousands of proteins, different types of proteins needed for a typical cell to function. And those proteins are also made up of letters as well, biochemical letters. These are called amino acids, and there are 20 different amino acids where the precise sequence actually determines the structure and the function of proteins.
Okay.
So you have two languages, if you will, inside the cell. The language of DNA and the language of proteins.
So if I understand, so the DNA is sequenced in a way to produce various amino acids, and then the sequencing of those amino acids tells you what sort of proteins you get.
That's right.
And then the proteins are actually what do the work of making the cell function, if you will.
Right.
So it is very much like a computer program where you write this thing and it says to do X, Y, and Z, and it does X, Y, and Z, and it does something, whatever that something may be.
Now, but you have two languages.
Okay.
You've got the DNA language and the protein language, so you need a set of rules to translate one language into another language.
Okay.
And that's the genetic code.
Okay.
So the genetic code is the set of rules that essentially allow for that information to go from one format, the DNA format, to the protein format. So what actually defines the information in the cell is actually the genetic code.
Okay.
So you could think of this as being the heart of biochemistry itself. The heart of life's chemistry is this set of rules called the genetic code. And people for a long time just thought that the genetic code was a frozen accident produced by the outworkings of an evolutionary process. But over the last couple of decades or so, scientists studying the genetic code have come to realize that these rules are highly optimized.
So optimized means that whatever happens, it happens in the best way. I mean, that's generally what optimized. And I've talked with you enough to know that optimization at least plays out recognizing that the cell operates in kind of a noisy environment where you've got various aspects of the code can switch. So I'm presuming the optimization plays into, in the light of these variations, mutations, and things that happen, your proteins still end up working the way they do.
That's right. I mean, because a mutation would be a change in the genetic letters of DNA. And so when those change, it means that the proteins are going to change.
Right.
And that's not a great situation. So the set of rules is designed in such a way that if a mutation happens, what's called a substitution mutation, that means you're going to generate a change in the code that's going to specify either the same amino acid in that protein or one that has very similar chemical or physical properties. And
so the minimization, or the error minimization, if you will, is not that it gets rid of the mutations, it's that when the mutation happens, the code makes sure it does the right thing anyway.
That's right. It kind of buffers out that mutation. Now,
I got to say that's remarkable. I write a lot of computer code, and I have yet to write a piece of code that you just throw a random piece or throw a new letter in or throw a new word in. Most of the time it won't even compile, and even if it compiles, it won't do what I say. That is really a remarkable thing.
It is, and there are 10 to the 18 possible genetic codes that could have existed.
Okay.
And the code that we see in nature seems to be superior to all the possible codes that could have existed. And in fact, recently researchers discovered that there's a different type of mutation. What we talked about previously was a substitution mutation. These are called frame shift mutations. It's kind of complex what's going on there.
Okay.
But the code seems to be optimized to buffer the effects of frame shift mutations as well.
So it does both of these bufferings.
It's a double optimization. And then there's also evidence that the code is optimized to harbor multiple overlapping codes, because in addition to the genetic code in DNA, there's other codes that lay on top of it. So you have like this triple optimization for the genetic code. And so the idea is that you see such exquisite optimization that it's very difficult to account for how that code would be that optimized in an evolutionary framework. And there's such an elegance to it that it really looks like that there was a mind involved.
You know, that's interesting because, I mean, anytime you're watching sci-fi, and granted, we don't have other life to compare this with, but they're always finding, this thing, and it's so much more sophisticated than what we do. The conclusion everybody always draws is, there's a mind behind this. It seems like when we're looking at the genetic code, it's optimized for different kinds of buffering from errors that are introduced. It's optimized across a whole slew of different ways of doing it, and it does it in the best possible way and carries multiple codes at the same time. That really does look like there's a mind behind it.
Yeah. Simon Conway Morris, who's an evolutionary biologist, at one point said that the genetic code in nature displays an eerie perfection. And those, to me, are words that you would use to describe a system that's designed, but a system that's designed when you didn't expect that design to be there.
Well, thanks, Fuzz. I appreciate your comments again. You know, I'd encourage you to go to reasons.org and look for Fuzz's great blog on this. It's called The Optimal Design of the Genetic Code, because there you will get more understanding of how this optimization works and how it points to a mind and how you can use that information to point others that you know around you to the God who created all of us.
That does it for us this week on 2819. We hope you enjoyed all of our Christmas-themed topics for the segments.
And we really hope that you've been encouraged by the show to just go ahead and share your faith and to do so with confidence and compassion.
And if you want to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show.
I'm really hoping to read a lot of comments and you guys wishing us all a Merry Christmas.
Yes.
See y'all next time.